morning, good morning. How's everyone doing so far this morning, or day, or evening, depending on where you're at? Today we're going to be doing whales. They're really fun to do, and we get to just kind of play with color and also learn a little bit about sketching. A very little bit. Hello from Dubai, 8 p.m. Yes, happy evening, I suppose, to you. It's 11 a.m. here for me. And we've got kind of a nice warm summer day here. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. I'm going to wait until the actual time that I advertised to get started, but you can start to get together your different supplies. I'm going to be using round brushes today, actually probably a smaller one than I normally do, about a size 6. And I'm going to be using a dried pan set here. Don't need a ton to do this with. I'm also going to be working on 5x7 sheets. That's kind of a nice size for this. You like whales? Nice. Yeah, they're beautiful creatures. And they're easy to draw, so this is a great one if you're nervous about sketching on your own. Has anybody been reading up on that project to learn whale language, basically? That's pretty cool. I'm always interested. It would be really neat if we could decode their language. I don't know how they're going to go about doing that, though. It seems really complicated. We have just a few minutes. I might actually start by taping one of mine down before we get started. Again, I'm using 5x7. This is 140 pound. This is Canson watercolor paper. Hello, happy that you're here. And I personally am just using just kind of a very basic masking tape to tape these down. These we're going to get pretty wet in the very center, but they're not going to be as wet as some of our other paintings, so if you don't have something to tape these down with or in a notebook, they'll be just fine. Be getting started in 1 minute. Oh, you'll also need a pencil and an eraser. You could also probably do this with part of this with a watercolor pencil, but we are going to be drawing outside of the lines, so make sure you're going to do this light. I will be doing mine dark so that you guys can actually see. But make sure you've got an eraser because you're going to have to erase a little bit of what we do. Draw. All right, it is 11, so let's get started. My name is Lacey Walker. I am the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts. If you want to see some of my other stuff, you can see me on Instagram, Lacey Walker Art or Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I primarily actually use those accounts to communicate with you guys, where you send me pictures, and I absolutely love seeing what you do. So we're going to get started. Today we're going to be doing whales. You can use painter's tape. I know a lot of watercolorists that use painter's tape. I just use this cheap masking tape because it's cheaper. All right, so go ahead and grab a piece of paper. We're going to be actually drawing on this. Tape it down or grab your sketchbook or whatever you've got, and then you're going to grab your pencil. And these don't take a huge amount of time to paint, so we might, well, I might need to let mine dry more, so it will probably take me a little bit longer. If you've got a hairdryer, this one will definitely help you with a hairdryer. So first thing we're going to do in order to sketch, if you're nervous about sketching, it's totally fine. This one is a super easy one and pretty forgiving to sketch. Let's keep this here just as a reference. But the way that I draw my whales is I actually start by making a V shape. Now, the wider the shape of the V, the more kind of elongated and a less of a slope that the whale is going to have, the more extreme angle of the V, the more curved the whale is going to be. So I'll probably do 2 of these. I'm going to be drawing dark, but you should draw really, really light because you want to make sure that you're not going to be able to see these marks too much, but I'm going to draw darker so that you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So start by making a V, and you want to make sure that you leave about 1 inch on either side of that V, because we're going to actually have to draw outside the lines of this, but just start by making a V about like this. Then you want to make a dot about 2/3 of the way up between this bottom V point and these top lines here. Just make a little dot there, or a little mark. And then you're going to actually connect the dot here to the tip of this outside part of the V. So we're making kind of like a chevron shape. Do the same thing on both sides. Then you're going to kind of just gently round this area so that it's not as pointed. And then right kind of here, right above where this point is, you want to round where it feels natural, to kind of get the bottom or the belly of the whale. You could make it a little bit further down too if you want to, but just round this off here. I'm not going to erase this part of the V yet, this part down here, because it's actually a really good point to use as a reference point of where to put your fin, but I'm going to wait to put that on until the last bit. So you can choose either side for your head and your tail. So if you want to swap your sides, you totally can on this one, but I'm going to kind of go with what I have drawn up here too. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add this tail on here. Now it's kind of like one of those brackets that you would see on a keyboard, but we go just above where this is, so we don't want this to be completely blocked off. And we're just going to make a little curve that's going to go like that. Then you're going to make that bracket shape, as I mentioned, which is kind of like that. Are these just called brackets on the keyboard? I'm not sure. But we're making that shape here, which is going to create the actual tail shape. And then again, round that off and bring that over here. So I'm drawing pretty dark. I would be drawing, normally if I were drawing on this paper, I would be drawing about this light, but I don't think you guys can actually see that in here. So try to draw really lightly. Then in order to actually get the head, so I think this one is called, what whale is this? I'm totally blanking. I had a whole list of whales the other day. Is this a, I think this is a humpback whale. All right. So our head is actually going to need to come out and under part of this, but we're using this V kind of as a reference so we can see how much it needs to come out. This is going to be a good way to kind of figure out proportions of things. And, oh, this is a blue whale. Thank you. Yes, yes. That's right. But that's the beauty of this little V-type shape. So we're going to, the first thing we're going to do is right up here, we're going to make a little M, because that's going to become the point where the mouth is. So make a little M or a little bird type shape up here. And then for this bottom part, you're going to want to kind of follow a curved line here, but make it a little bit more natural. It doesn't need to be a perfect curve, Just make sure that they kind of flow together there. And then we're going to kind of do the same thing on the top. We're going to make this a little bit more organic shape. So now we have the main part of the body of the whale. We also want to add, I think this is called a dorsal fin back here. So about a third of the way between the tail and this middle dot, just add a little fin here on the top. And then this bottom point for where we made this initial V is a really good place to actually put the fin. So you can use this as the fin that is on this side of the body, not on the other side of the body. But just bring this back and then have it attach there. That's the front part of the fin. And then we want to put the other one back here too. Maybe it kind of disappears behind the other one. Okay, at this point, before we start erasing things, we want to actually kind of define where the eye is going to be. In general, their eyes are right around here, so kind of in the middle between these two lines here. And then their mouths, actually, they stay pretty high up until this white patch. It will avoid the eye area. And so it kind of dips down, and then it disappears kind of behind where those fins are. So this is the general drawing of the whale. Now we can actually go in and erase some of those pieces. So we need to erase in this fin here. We need to erase right in here and part of this. If you accidentally erase too much, that's fine. You can just redraw. So I'm just erasing the marks that I don't need, but that were good guidelines to have. All right, there's our whale. Trying to get all my eraser shavings off. All right, so now it's actually time to prep some watercolor. And you can make yours whatever colors you want. I'm primarily going to be doing some blues and some greens and maybe putting a little bit of browns and yellows in. So I'm just actually going to wet my palette so I can get these activated. And then you might have clean wells here. I'm going to keep the colors I have here because I can actually use some of them. I don't like to waste if I can avoid it. But I'm going to spray a little water in all of these too, just so that they're ready to go. So the first thing we want to mix up is a really light blue, just one that is going to help us know where we have placed the water in here. So you can do whatever colors you want. This is kind of, I think this has got some phthalo blue as well as a little bit of a few other colors. So we'll see what color this actually turns out to be. I've got a tester strip here just to check. This is about the darkness that we want this initial color to be, but you want quite a bit of it. You want enough where you can get a nice saturated coat on this part of the whale. And then you want to either have your tube colors ready to go and kind of have a few different little dots. I'd recommend a phthalo blue. If you've got a viridian green would be nice. Another blue would be good too. Or you can go with just whatever colors you want. Add in some pinks or whatever you think is going to look nice. We're going to be dipping straight into the pigment for part of this, so make sure that if you've got pans, make sure they're activated so you can dip in and really grab a bunch of pigment, or have those just kind of little dollops out if you're using tube paints. I am using a size 6 round brush. Any round brush should actually work for this, any kind of basic brush. So I want to take any blue, any light blue color, just make it about this desaturated of a color, add in a bunch of water to it, and then we're just going to wet the entire area that is going to be blue on this whale. And you might need to do a couple coats on this because we want to keep it nice and damp. In general, I work where I actually hold these up so that I can kind of control the direction that this is, as well as I just like how it feels in my hand better because I've got more control. And I'm going to put this blue all the way in here on both of these fins as well as this body, except for this area of his throat. And you want to color in the lines as best you can. If you go a little bit out, it's totally fine. Just a little bit. Also, I pre-apologize if I sneeze. My allergies have picked this time to really act up. And we just want to put a nice light blue coat right in here. You could do this just with water. Sometimes I'll do this just with water, but it is nice to have this blue because then you actually know where it is and you don't have to kind of chase the light to figure out where you have placed water or not. So just cover all these areas in a nice light blue color. And then I'm going to grab my light source so I can show you something, because we want to keep this all at about the same level of I don't know if you guys can hear that, but my dog is laying on the floor upstairs and wagging her tail. She's got a very exaggerated tail. All right, here's my light source. Now, if I were to shine the light on this, it really gives me a lot of information on what's happening with the actual saturation of water on the paper. So you can see here I've got some standing water. We don't necessarily want that, so maybe I'll actually suck that up with my brush by drying my brush off. And then you can see that down here where I wet this bottom fin, it's not shining at all. So this one is actually a little bit too dry. It's still a little bit too wet at the bottom here for a lot of fun things to happen. Some fun things will happen with that, but you can kind of see how it's becoming a little bit more mattified as it soaks in. So you might want to, if you don't have a full coat on some of these areas, you might want to go in and tap in some water in the areas that are drying a little bit faster than you want them to, because we want this to have a pretty nice even coat of liquid on it. Okay, all right, before this dries too much, then what you want to do is actually go straight into your other pigment. So maybe into your some of your blues, and if you need to, you can kind of tap them off. And we want to concentrate a lot of that color right at the bottom, but we just want to drop this in. Whales, they do have usually a pretty even coat or coloring to them, but the way that the light reflects on the water is very unique. So it's fun to grab some of these and just drop them in and kind of give the illusion that maybe the waves and things are reflecting on them and creating some really interesting light patterns. So just drop in one color here, and then maybe go in and grab, like this is a viridian here. This might be really nice mixed with a little bit of that blue to drop in, and just have fun. This is the time where you get to experiment and actually see how these colors are going to flow together in these wet on wet applications. And just drop some colors in. I'm going to find this is I think my phthalo blue here, which is my favorite color in watercolor. I'm going to drop some of that in a few areas too while everything is still nice and wet. If you've added too much pigment in one area that you don't like, you can wash your brush off. You can dab it on your rag or your paper towel, and you can actually pick up a little bit of that. If we want to give this a little more roundness, we want to make this part here a little bit lighter because it's going to hint to the fact that it is curved. So you can actually pick up a little bit of that pigment. You can also play with dropping in just some water into where you've got your pigment if you want to create some fun blooms and texture. we really just get to kind of let go and just let what happens here. You could add in maybe some purple type colors. Let's drop in a little purple. You could add in some black at the bottom if you wanted to. I think I'm going to avoid doing that today because I just don't feel like adding black, but if you really wanted to add in a bunch of shadow, we might actually add some shadow underneath here in a moment. But for now, I don't want to put that on this whale. Mixing some phthalo blue with some violet type color. You can do whatever colors you want, but I just want to get some variation of color. And while this is wet, this exercise here in this painting is going to really help you understand how your paint is going to move in wet on wet application. So this is a really good learning exercise too. I want to put a little more color here. If it's a little bit too dry, place a little color down, wash your brush off, and then make it a little bit damp. And you can kind of just tap it to create a little bit more flow into the area that is still wet enough. You can grab certain areas and redistribute them where you want them to be. I think I'm going to try to, I need to wait for this to dry a little bit down here, but I want to create a few blooming effects down in this bottom part. So I got to wait until this becomes more that damp paper where it isn't reflecting the light as much. And I should be able to get a few of those effects kind of right in here by dropping in just some fresh water, just a little bit at a time. You want to just give them interesting texture. The more texture you give them, the more interesting this is going to look. I mean, if you're trying to do yours where it's all one perfect color, that's totally fine. Okay. So I'm going to leave mine there for now. I might do a second coat. I'm not entirely sure yet. But what I am going to do is create a little bit of shadow so that we can get a little bit of curvature happening on the underside of this whale. We don't want to do too much, but I just kind of want to hint to it. I'm also going to be doing some line work at the very end of this painting, but for now I want to actually take, so this is my Payne's Gray, just a black color. You don't have to do black if you don't want to. I find in this painting it works pretty well. You could do a blue hue or a dark blue, but I think this just Payne's Gray will work nice. Payne's Gray I have has a little bit of a blue hue to it when I thin it down, so I like it. But we could actually, let's go ahead. Let's add a little bit of blue to this too, just if we want to make it a little bit more blue. And we want to load our brush up with not quite as much as you would use for like a flat wash, but almost. Then I'm actually, this is the other reason why I like to work on something that I can move around, is this is a much more natural motion for my hand to make than like this or this even. So I'm going to flip this over here, and I've got my fresh water over to the side. You can't actually see this because it's hard for me to get everything in frame here, but I've got fresh water to my side that's going to be ready. I'm going to fill up my brush with this kind of gray-blue color. Let me actually turn this away for now so that we don't have as harsh of shadows. And I'm going to place this gray color right along the edge of where I drew that throat part. And then I'm going to quickly wash my brush off, grab some fresh water, and I'm going to touch right along these lines. I'm being careful not to actually come up and touch this other blue area because it will bleed into it because it's not entirely set. But just soften the edge of that gray color that you put down there. And that will give us kind of a nice little shadow. Okay, so at this point, we can add splatters onto the background if we want to. And you can do this in a couple different ways. You could literally paint on little splotches if you want to be really careful. If you don't care if it gets into this part of the whale, which I don't really care right now, but I do want to avoid it going on the front throat part. You can find a scrap of paper. Let's find Where is my tester strip? I just had it a minute ago. Is it underneath? No. I don't understand how I misplace these when I'm literally just working right here. Oh, it's right here. And we can actually kind of tear off a piece of scrap paper in kind of the shape that we want to protect. And you can actually just rest this over the throat area to prevent it from going right there. Then, in order to make these little splishes and splashes, you can use whatever colors you want. I think I'm going to be going for kind of this sea green color that's here. So I'm going to wash my brush, make sure that it's clean. And I actually am going to switch over to a larger brush because you can get a better amount of drops that come out of it. You can do this with a thin one. I'll show you with both of them. But this is a size 12, so I've got a size 12 and a size 6 today. The size doesn't really matter today so much. It's more just what do you feel comfortable using. But I'm going to grab this kind of sea green color that I mixed up. This was a combination of Viridian and I think a cobalt type blue. Okay, so I'm going to really pick a whole bunch of this up with my brush. Then make sure you don't have anything around you that you care that is going to get paint splatters. So you might need to do this part outside, but I'm in my art room, so I can do whatever I want in here. And I'm going to actually put my finger out here, and I'm going to just tap my brush on my finger, and it's going to help release some of those splatters. I'm going to grab some more. There. Let's do the same thing with that size 6 brush so we can see the difference. Really try to load your brushes up. You want them to almost be dripping out. And that one still works. It just, you get slightly smaller splatters. Let's put another fun color in. I'm kind of feeling like doing a pink. So I'm going to actually turn this around because I don't have any space for a pink color. So this is going to be my favorite go-to quinacridone color. Just going to put some water right here, grab some of that quinacridone. You can do this with whatever colors you want. I'm going to load that up in my brush as much as I can, and yeah, I like the other brush for the splishy splashies better. Let's even give us a little bit more to work with here. Grab a little more water, grab a little more pigment, and ooh, that really went right on the whale, but it's kind of working on the whale. Now, if you're not getting the biggest splashes and you don't want to make a huge mess, you can actually just kind of come down and tap. Give yourself a few kind of organic-ish drops. It's all right. Do what you need to, you know? You could even grab some more water and almost like let it just drop right on top of those areas. If you don't like what you have, you can dry your brush off and you can grab it. Just go with the flow here. I'm going to take this off. So see, we were able to preserve that one white area. I did get some of those splatters on the body, and I think it actually works pretty well in the painting, but I usually like to prevent it from going on that throat area. So do that until you're happy with it. Now, at this point, you could suck up some extra of this standing water, and I'm going to actually do this so that this dries fast enough in general, because I'm trying not to use the hairdryer today, because it's too loud. It's too loud to do on live. But suck up the extra water that would just fly everywhere, and then you can use a hairdryer to actually dry this off and add in some line work. What I'm actually going to do is just paint a whole nother whale in case people joined a little bit late, as well as it'll give this time to dry and we can see how we do a little bit different. You know what? And then also on our second one, let's add in some salt. So there's a question about salt, and salt is really fun to put on these because it does create a really interesting texture on here. So let me go grab my salt, and I'm going to also tape down a new sheet of 5x7 paper. So I just have a container of some, this is just sea salt, coarse sea salt. You can use normal salt too. I like the coarse stuff because it has a lot of different texture to it. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, and it will give us a lot of variation. But whatever salt you have is fine. Table salt works. And we won't be using this till later in this, but let's start again by taping this down and then doing our little sketch. All right, so starting over from scratch. And here's the other one. While it's drying, I'll try to put that kind of in frame. And this is really good. I like using salt on the whales because sometimes whales have like little barnacles on them that attach, and it can have the effect of having some little barnacles. Now, I probably won't be able to show you how to remove the salt. Actually, and in this painting here, I did use salt in this because you do have to let them dry, and if you can let them dry naturally with the salt, which might take a little bit longer because it creates some pooling, so you would maybe even want to wait till the next day to remove the salt. I can actually do a video on how to remove it when I go to do this later. All right. We're starting over, we're drawing again. So I did a pretty wide V on this one, so we get a nice slope. Let's do a more angled V to see kind of the difference in how to draw like that. So again, we make a V. We want to make sure that we're leaving about an inch on any side of this V so that we can actually draw a little bit out of those lines. And this one's going to have a more extreme angle to it. Not a perfect V, but it'll work. All right, then we go about 2/3 of the way up and we make a dot straight up from the bottom of the V. Connect that dot to the two tops of the V to create a little chevron shape like that. Then we're going to round here and round the bottom where it feels natural to you. About there. So we're basically using about the center 2/3 or third of this V shape to create part of this belly of the whale. Then again, we're going to go just above the outside part of this tip of the chevron shape. We're going to make a little kind of squiggle up. Then we're going to make that bracket shape where we come down. It goes up, down, up, and then rounds back again to make that very definitive whale shape. Again, if you are drawing these, you want to be drawing much lighter than what I'm showing here. I am drawing darker for the sake of being able to show you guys. But if you draw as dark as I am, it's hard to erase and you're going to have some pencil lines in your final painting. All right, and then what we're going to do is next, we're going to define where the head is and the throat, which comes out on the other side of this chevron type shape. And we're going to, this is right here, this point is kind of where the mouth is, the two different points. So you make a little M here. That's going to give us kind of the lips and where the mouth closes together. And then we want this throat to come out here. But we kind of want it to follow a general curve, but we also want it to have a little bit of a natural feel to it, which I don't actually like what I just drew there, so I'm going to erase that and do that again. I like it to be a little bit different. There. I think that's how I'm going to have mine. It's not my favorite shape that I've drawn, but it'll work. And then we want the head also to have a little more natural feel, so maybe bring it down, bring it up, and then bring it together again. Just give it a little curvature. The eye is going to fall somewhere right around here on this whale. And so we want to actually take the point of this chevron shape and keep it up pretty high until right around where the eye is going to be, and that's where it's going to fall. First, we might actually want to define where these fins are. So using that chevron part, sweep it back and give him a little fin there. And that fin is so close up to the front, it's making me want to actually round this part more to make it seem like the front part is facing a little bit more so that it feels a little bit more natural with that fin placement. And then depending on how you're looking at this, you can either place the other fin behind over here, or maybe you can't even see it at all, but I'm going to just kind of hint to it there. And I'm going to have that come down and kind of disappear right here. Okay, and then I'm going to finally be able to erase these lines. Okay, there is our second whale. I'm going to do a lot of the steps very similarly to what I did, except for we are going to be using salt. Now, you asked about salt or silica. I have never tried silica, so I am curious about that. But I have done salt, so that we're going to do salt today. Okay, so I'm using a size 6 round brush. Any brush that you feel comfortable doing some pretty decent following of lines is going to work for you. Here's my little tester strip, and then I want a really light color blue. So that's actually a little bit too dark. Uh-oh, hope I'm not going to get the hiccups. So I'm going to spray a little more water in there to water this down a little bit. And there we go. I want it to be a little bit lighter here. Oh yes, thank you, the dorsal fin. Yes, yes, yes. Totally forgot. We just make a little hint to a fin at the very top here too. Good catch. And then we're going to be just taking a really nice light coat of blue, and this is the one where we're just creating a wet layer in all the areas that are going to be blue. So we're kind of, doing a little coloring book here now. We've created the coloring book, but we're kind of coloring in it, and we just want to take this light blue color and get a nice saturated layer of color here. I'm going to actually need to pick this up. And we're just getting a good coat. You can use this drawing trick with this V shape for pretty much any of the whales. You just have to adjust, the head. Or things like dolphins, this would work too. Okay, we're getting a nice coat here. Again, I'm going to grab my light source so that you can see the reflection better. And you can see down here I've got way too much water, so I'm going to suck up some of that here. I've got quite a bit there, and I've got quite a bit there. We don't want too much standing water on this, but mine's already starting to dry a little bit too much. You can see it's not really shining up here, so I'm going to make sure I put some on there, because I want this whole thing to be pretty much wet so I don't have harsh lines. I want all the lines and the colors I have to have kind of soft edges to them. So I'm just making sure everything is about the same level of wetness here. You can see I've got kind of a nice just sheen on it. Then I'm going to start dipping straight into my pigment. I'm going to do a lot more phthalo blue this time because I love phthalo blue. And I'm going to be concentrating this primarily on the areas that are kind of the underbelly areas to kind of darken those just kind of naturally, as well as if there was kind of a crevice, like there would be kind of a crease on parts of this. drop in a whole bunch of color. We don't need to be as precise on this because we are going to be, I'm going to be dropping in some salt on this, which is going to help this a lot, but I do want to get some variation of color. I'm going to drop in some of this sea green that I mixed up. This is Viridian and I think Cobalt. If we want to create some more natural type colors, we can drop in a bunch of different colors in here. I'm going to go straight in with some green here. But you could even put in something like a burnt sienna. Could look nice in this on parts. Let's put some of that color in. Ooh, and maybe a little bit too much there. I'm going to grab that and distribute that in a few different places. If you don't like that, don't do it. I'm going to cover up parts of that by adding in some more blues. But it's creating just a little variation of color. And we want this to be pretty wet and you want it to be pretty pigmented because if you're going to be dropping in salt like I am, you want quite a bit of pigment and you want quite a bit of water. What's going to happen is that the pigment and the water is going to actually cluster right around the salt crystals, and then the pigment will settle and dry right around them, and it creates a really interesting effect. Okay, I'm just making sure this is nice and wet. We want this to be air on the side of too wet for this. And then before this sets, I'm going to grab my salt and I'm going to just sprinkle it on. And I don't know if you can see this happen, but as soon as I drop this salt on, that pigment really does settle around where I have put the salt. Now, even at this point, because now I like what's happening with, it's going to make some interesting shapes for me, but it has taken a whole bunch of that pigment that I had kind of placed in specific areas and moved them a little bit away. So what I'm going to do is actually I can go in at this point and I can drop in some more pigment because I want to put a little bit darker pigment towards the bottom parts here because that's what kind of creates a little bit of that texture and shape. And so we can just, if you just carefully take the pigment and you can just drop it in amongst where that salt is, and you can kind of redistribute it to be where you want it to be. Everything is still pretty wet here. It's just clustering in specific areas. Let's make kind of a blue-green with some phthalo blue and Viridian here to drop in a few areas too to break up those colors a little bit. You've not been using enough water. Yeah, that's the hardest part to learn. People either paint too wet or too dry, and it's the hardest thing to kind of figure out with watercolor. Be patient with yourself. It will come with time. Let's even put a little there. I want a little bit more of this blue right at the bottom here. Even over here. Okay, I'm going to let that set as it is there. All right, again, if we want to create a little bit of kind of depth and feel of the roundness of the throat here, you want to, if you have something, you can actually... So did we drop salt on this or spray salt water? It looks awesome. Oh, I dropped salt into this. Yes. I'm going to blow off the extra salt here. It shouldn't blow off in the other areas. You know, these go so fast. Let's, while I let this settle for a minute, let me grab an extra piece of paper and let me show you when you're using salt, the different effects that would happen if you used too much or too little water, or the kind of the quote-unquote right amount. Let's put heavy quotes around the correct way of anything, because you can do things in a ton of different ways. All right, so here's a piece of paper. Hello, hello. And let's actually, I'm going to wash my brush off. I'm going to make sure it's pretty damp. I'm going to show you first if I use too little water, what would happen if I then drop some salt in it. So let's put the coat down, and it's pretty wet, but even just with this where it's just barely sheen, if we drop some salt on here, not a ton is going to happen. You're going to get a little bit of something, but if it's too dry, you're going to get nothing. Like down over here, not really anything is happening. Getting a little something, but not much. Now I'm going to tap this off just so that I don't put a whole bunch of salt in my paints. And then let's go way too wet. So we'll really lean into the wetness here. I'm really trying to get it too wet. I want it to like almost run off the page. Okay. Now, we're probably going to be surprised because if we put salt in here, it's still going to work pretty well. It's going to start to cluster, but you're not going to be able to control it as much, and it will kind of melt some of the salt right away, so you're not going to get as many textures from it. Now, if we balance kind of in between these two things here, need some more color in order for this to work better. Okay, so if we balance between too dry and too wet, you can see here it really is just kind of dissolving that salt. And we get this pretty nice and wet. We want a little bit of that standing water, but not too much. And then we put it on. That's when we're going to get those really spectacular effects where it really groups things together. Your phone died? Oh shoot! I will be posting this replay onto YouTube probably tomorrow. So that's kind of the difference between if you go too dry, you're going to get a little bit of something, not much. If you go too wet, it's going to just dissolve your salt. And if you go kind of in between, then you can go this way. So the way is to fix these things. Let's say you erred on the side of too dry. Well, and then you put a bunch of salt on here. Let's just pretend like we've got salt on here. If it's too dry, totally fine. Just take some of that pigment and just drop it in around it. You'll be able to kind of correct parts of this. It might not be quite as smooth as you wanted it to be, but you can still take advantage of the effects by just dropping in some of this around these here. If you've got it too wet, just take a minute and take either your paper towel or take your round brush and dry it off. And just slowly, patiently suck up a little bit extra of that water until you get it to about this point. And then you can drop it in and you'll get those effects again. So yeah, we're getting some really interesting effects here. Because you get the pigment kind of is attracted to the salt, and so it settles and it will dry right around where the salt molecules are. But then it does affect how things dry, so then you're going to get some interesting blooming effects, which is what's going to create all that fun texture. You appreciate the learning time always? Oh, well good, I'm so happy. All right. This one is pretty much dry enough in order to actually kind of do another layer on. Let's just check in on our salt one real quick too. Let me knock over a whole bunch of stuff. As you can see here, let's get the light source back in so you can see some of the reflections. You can just barely see that it is, most of this is pretty dry except for right where all those salt are. And you can use a hairdryer at this point, but I do find it to have just better effects if you just let this naturally dry. And so I probably won't actually show you the end result of this, but I can actually make a separate video so you guys can see what it looks like at the very end. And I can post that and show you how to remove it too. So, but look at how it actually will like repel the pigment from certain areas. And this to me looks like the reflections from the tops of light in the water. It's, yeah, I love it. All right. Anyways, back to your regularly scheduled programming. What brushes do I recommend? So for super beginners, find yourself a good Taklon or synthetic round brush, something that's got a nice point to it. I usually tell people to get like a size 8 because it can do pretty much everything, especially if you just want to buy one brush. But I find the synthetic bristles are really good for beginners because they have enough give to get some fun effects with them, but they are sturdy enough to where it's not so loosey-goosey that you have to like really know what you're doing. So I recommend synthetic to begin with for beginners. And it doesn't really matter which one you get, just make sure it's got a nice point, and there are these Taklon round brushes. There are tons of brushes that you can use for watercolor. You could even use your acrylic ones. Anything you have is totally fine. If you want to just get started with anything you have. But if you're looking to buy something, I found the one that I've been using a lot. I think it's in the my sink being cleaned, but it's called a Dynasty. Oh no, here it is. Yeah, this is a Dynasty one, and this is what it looks like dry. And when I wet it, it gets a nice tip and point to it. But I think that this brush was like $6 or something like that, if I remember correctly. You don't need to break the bank at the beginning. This will be on YouTube, yes. So I'll be reposting this, and I do already have a YouTube tutorial on how to do this in general, but I think I covered a little bit more during this hour, so if you want, you can rewatch this. Alright, so what we're going to do now is, mine is dry. Wait until this is dry because we didn't make sure that we had waterproof pen on these. I'm just using a Paper Mate felt tip pen. I love these for adding details afterwards because I think the pigmentation in these is great, and I think they're just beautiful to use. But they are not waterproof, and so I need to make sure this is dry. But you could either leave this as it is, and you could actually go in with your watercolor brush and add some eye details and things, but I usually like to add in the pen. I like the pen and ink contrast. So you don't have to do this. Which watercolors do I recommend? That is an evolving opinion I have. I'm heavy into testing land right now of a whole bunch of watercolors, and I'm trying to figure that out. I do really like these Shin hand ones. I think they're really good quality for the price point because you can get a really decent set of these for about $1 or $2. Okay, so you can do this part or not. You don't have to, but I am going to outline all the major shapes of this with my pen because I just like how it looks. As well as it's going to help me cover up. I drew really heavy so that on screen you guys can see, and I've got a ton of pencil lines on here, and so it's going to help me hide some of that. And I am being careful, but I'm not being super perfect. I'm just kind of going with the flow. This is watercolor, and often in watercolor, the beauty is in some of the imperfections. So embrace that, and it will help you kind of forgive yourself. Alright, now I've got the major parts outlined, so we need to add a couple things. One is we need to add an eye. can already see where my eye is, and I'm actually going to take advantage of what is happening with the watercolor here, because it's kind of created a little eyeball and then a little crease here. It's actually kind of made its own on accident. So we can really overthink the eye if we want to, and you could really draw a real detailed eye, but it's almost better just to kind of hint. Whales' eyes, on some of them, are really small for their bodies, and so they're usually just kind of like some folds and kind of wrinkles around an eye type shape. You know, we don't need to get too complicated. Some little bit of detail is going to hint enough to give your imagination the cue that there is an eye. So I'm gonna take advantage of where that kind of center already is, drop in a dot here, and then I'm gonna give kind of a fold area and a few little wrinkles around here. And that's all I'm doing. I mean, I barely just touched the pen to the paper a few times. Not overthinking it. The other thing is they often have some kind of striations on their neck, so I'm going to very lightly with the pen just kind of follow this line up, and I'm going to lift before I actually get to the very top part of that, create some of those striations, and then if you want, you can add some little barnacles. So just make a couple little nodule circular areas. You don't have to do this part, but it can kind of add some fun texture to it. On his fin, maybe. And there we have it. You could add more detail if you want. I'm going to leave mine kind of there. I really like the what the watercolor did on this one quite a lot. Let's look at this one here. So yep, this one is still super duper wet. So this is one I'll have to do a little follow-up on for you. But that's pretty much the end of the lesson today. I've got a few more minutes if you want to ask some questions. Also, please, 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 please send me pictures. Lacey Walker Art or Rebel Unicorn Crafts. Instagram is easier for me to see stuff there. I don't have as much stuff happening over there, so I get to see it. When do you do your watercolor classes? We do them every Saturday. It's 11 a.m. Mountain Time. I'm not entirely sure what that is for everybody else, but I do upload these later to YouTube, so that if you want to watch them later, you can totally do that. If you wanted additional texture, that is with the salt. You could also wait till it dries and then add a second layer on stuff. So, shoot, I don't have any examples that I can do this on now, because I've added pen to this. But you could definitely do a second layer. I would just wait for this to dry so that you would kind of get 2 layers of those effects happening on top of each other. Oh, you're very, very welcome. I really enjoy doing these, so I'm happy to help. Next week we'll probably be doing some more landscape type things. I'm trying to work on a couple videos on how to use blooming effects to do foregrounds and kind of like hint to fields, so I think we might be doing some of that next week. But as always, I'm also willing to take some requests to put on the list of things. I don't always teach everything right away, but it's because I have to learn how to do it. Oh, yes, okay. So, salt texture. If you did this, wait for this to dry totally naturally. You want to wait until tomorrow or something, maybe later today. The more patient you can be, the more interesting this texture is going to be. And also, sometimes the moisture actually hides under the salt molecules, so when you go to remove it, it'll smudge around. So just be patient and wait it out. When you actually go to remove the salt, you can do a couple things. If you're not going to be painting on it anymore, And it doesn't matter if you put your oil from your fingers on it, you can actually just use your finger, but you can also use a pretty stiff brush, like, let me find one. Something like one of these. You want it to be soft where it's not going to damage this. But, I mean, these are pretty rough, and you just brush it off. They will at first be a little resistant, but you can just kind of encourage them with this, just a little scrubbing type motion like that. Let's see, do I have any of these that are dry? There's a few molecules on a few of these salt things that are dry enough here. But just by kind of doing this, you'll be able to get it off. But you want to make sure that you wait until it's dry, because otherwise it's going to smudge like that. But I mean, you can do the same thing just kind of with your finger. Okay, well, I think that's it for me today. Again, please send me pictures. I hope everybody has a really good day. And yeah, I'll see you again next week.